Well, good morning, APU. It's good to be here with you this morning. So I understand it's preview weekend, so I can't see all of you out there, but if you're here visiting APU as a preview weekend guest, could you stand up and let us give you an APU welcome? Stand up right where you're at. So does that sound like they want you to be a part of their family? I think so. So thank you so much for coming. Well, it's a joy for me to be here. I love to speak in chapel. Grateful that I was given yet another opportunity. I want to thank the worship team. Every worship service, every chapel, you guys hit it out of the park. So thank you. Also want to give a shout out to Theater Arts. Last night was the opening of the musical Little Women. I was not there. My wife was there. She loved it. I'm going to go tonight. If you haven't got your tickets, check it out. So my name is David Bixby. I've served here. I've worked here at APU for almost 29 years, and I love this place. I've served in various roles. The last 13 years, I've served as executive vice president. It's interesting, in the spring, I felt like God moving in my heart and working in my heart, and felt like it was time to step away for me from that role. And so the future is unknown. I'm excited about it. I felt like God really led in that decision. One thing I want you to know is I love APU. Let me share with you a bit of my history. I'll do it quickly. So I came as a first-gen student in 1976. I realized almost everybody in this room wasn't even born then. I came as a transfer student. One of my classes in the fall semester of 76 was New Testament survey at 7:30. Thank God my future wife was sitting across the room and kept me awake in that class. So Renee and I have been married for 40 years. 40 years, yeah. In fact, my daughter had a baby yesterday, and I took my wife to the airport at 4:30 this morning, flying up to Portland. My 13th grandchild. Is that unbelievable? It is the way it is. So I have 4 children that have graduated from APU. 3 that have graduated, 1 that's a senior this year, Sam, and I have 10, 11 nieces and nephews. So I have a deep history with APU, and those of you who are checking APU out, you will love this place. This place is submitted to God and the kingdom, and I sure hope you choose APU as your choice. So what I want to talk to you about today is simply this. I know this generation. I've taught in the School of Business Ethics. I've been a walkabout guide, which I'll talk about a little bit later, for many, many years. I have a discipleship group. I meet with guys every Monday morning. What this generation wants more than anything else is transparency and honesty. And so when I thought about what I'd talk to you about this morning, it's going to be about that. So let me start with a confession. This year has been a really hard year for me and for my family in a number of ways. And I think for those of us who live in a space of a hard year or hard season, I think it is a fair question. It's a fair question to ask, where has God been in that space? And I want you to know that my faith has never wavered in this season of difficulty, but it's been a hard season. And I thought I'd start my message to you with a video. This video will be self-explanatory, and there's no words. It's my daughter, Quincy, and our journey the last 14 months. Check it out. Yeah, so that's the story of our life the last 14 months. So here's the cool thing. Quincy had her last infusion of immunotherapy yesterday, her last one. And she's cancer-free, and she comes home from the hospital as I speak. I thought she might be here, but yeah. So it has been a journey, and that's why I say it's fair to ask the question, where is God in all this? I know my daughter and son-in-law, Courtney and Jeremiah, have asked that question. September 24th of 2018 will be a day we'll always remember. It was surgery to remove a tumor that was 4 inches long, wrapped around her spine. She was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, stage 3, cancer-free now. She then went into radiation, chemotherapy, radiation, immunotherapy, and that brings you up to speed today. So again, I think it's fair to ask that question. I know there's many people out here, many students, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 people in this room. I know you've had semesters. This semester has been possibly as challenging as our last year has been. I get that. I do know this, that God has been faithful, but it's been a tough journey. So for the few minutes that I have here, I want to draw your attention to Genesis 37, chapter 37 to chapter 40. It's the Bible is a remarkable book, right? It's a real book about real people and real stories and real issue. And this morning, Joseph is our guy. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the Bible, maybe Job, that had more misfortune, more things happened to him that were undeserved than Joseph in the span of about 13 years. So when Joseph was 17 years old, you know, if you look at the first chapter, the first verse in chapter 37, Joseph is talking to his 11 brothers, and he's using them as representatives of the sun, moon, and stars. And he says, the sun, moon, and stars bowed down to me, kind of just insinuating that his brothers someday will bow down at him. Joseph was also the favorite son of Jacob, and everybody knew it. And Joseph's brothers hated him for that. So that family, Joseph's family, Jacob's sons, were Bedouin shepherds. And their job was to take their livestock, in this case probably sheep, and they would graze all over the countryside. And so the 11 brothers left. Joseph stayed home. They traveled from their home in Hebron to about 50 miles north to a village called Shechem. And they were grazing their sheep there. And Jacob wanted to know how his sons were doing, so he sent Joseph to them. So Joseph traveled the 50 miles to check his brothers and see how they were doing. So as he gets closer, his brothers see him coming, and they say, now is our chance. Let's kill our brother. Let's kill this dreamer. And so wiser heads prevailed, and Reuben said, let's not kill him. Let's put him in this cistern. And so they put him in a cistern, which is really a dry well, Reuben thinking he would come and rescue him later. Reuben left for a period of time, and a band of Ishmaelite traders on their way to Egypt came by. And the brothers said, not only can we get rid of Joseph by selling him, we'll make some money. So they sold him to the Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. So for this 17-year-old, his journey begins. It's not at all what he thought would happen. So he is on his way to Egypt, sold by his brothers, and betrayed by his family. So the first thing I want you to know about Joseph is he was betrayed by his brothers. As he's on his way to Egypt, he's taken immediately into a marketplace, and he's put on the trading block. And they sell him quickly to Potiphar, who was a captain of the guard for Pharaoh. So Joseph is in a country where he doesn't know the language, he doesn't know the culture, he has no friends, and he's just been sold by his brothers into what he believes would be a life of slavery. So my guess is Joseph is saying, and it's a fair question, where is God in all of this? So he's sold to Potiphar, and he goes to Potiphar's house, and he's about 17 or 18 years old, and he begins to learn the culture. He begins to learn the language. And Potiphar slowly begins to put him in charge of things. Now, he's still a slave. He's still a servant. Then the second event that shapes Joseph's life happens. And I'm going to read this straight out of the Bible as the Bible preaches it. This is what happened. And Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. And Joseph said, how could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. She kept putting pressure on Joseph, and day after day he refused to sleep with her. And he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he came in to do his work, and she came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, come on, sleep with me. And Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand, and he ran from the house. And when she saw that she was holding his cloak, and he had fled, she called out to her servants, and soon all the men came running. Look, she said, my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream, he ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me. And she kept that cloak until her husband came home, and she told him the story. That Hebrew slave that you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me, she said. But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak with me. And Potiphar was furious. And when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her, so he took Joseph and he threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. So back in that day, you weren't sentenced to a certain number of years. When you were thrown in prison, it could possibly be for life. My guess is Joseph's probably about 25 years old, and you gotta really believe that Joseph it's a fair question. Where is God in all this? So he's betrayed by his family, and he's falsely accused and slandered by the master of his house. So then you move Joseph further, we've moved further along in the story, and Joseph is now in prison. And in Genesis 40, it tells the story of the cupbearer who was placed in prison by Pharaoh and the baker. And they became friends with Joseph, and they had a dream. And Joseph listened to their dream, and he said, I believe my God can help me interpret this dream for you. Now, they had both been placed in prison because they'd done something wrong with the Pharaoh. And they were in prison as long as the Pharaoh desired. And so Joseph went to the cupbearer first, and he said, this is the meaning of your dream. In 3 days, you'll be restored back to your former job. I don't know how great of a job it was. A cupbearer was the person that tested all the food and drink for Pharaoh to make sure it wasn't poison. If after about 10 minutes the cupbearer was doing okay, then it was good for the Pharaoh to eat. So the cupbearer has a promise from Joseph that he's going to be back in, and that's the interpretation of the dream. And this is what Joseph says to the cupbearer. He says, listen, please remember me. Tell Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. And then he turned to the baker, and he said, I don't have his kid of news for you. In 3 days, Pharaoh's going to call you out, and he's going to execute you. And sure enough, 3 days later, the cupbearer is restored to his place in the kingdom, and the baker is executed. And this is one of the last verses in Genesis 40. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. So one of his friends forgets him, leaves him in prison, and Joseph is there for 2 more years. He doesn't have the advantage of knowing what we know, that this will happen later. But he's in prison for 2 more years. So I think about that, and I think about Joseph and how he was alone and forgotten, and where was God in all this? Well, if you look at Genesis 39:2 and Genesis 39:21, this is what it says. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him his faithful love. In verse 39, verse 21, it says, and the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. So that is where God was. That is where he was when Joseph was betrayed. That is where he was when Joseph was slandered. That is where he was when he was in a dungeon in prison. God never left. God always gave him favor. And while he was in that prison, God became real. And as I think about my journey over the last year and a half, I got to tell you that God has become more real to me than ever before in my life. You know, C.S. Lewis often talks about God whispering in our joy and shouting in our pain. I have experienced that. So it's been my privilege to be a walkabout guide. I have the black bear sitting in my group from this last year in the second row here. It's been my privilege. Hi, black bears. It's been my privilege to be a walkabout wilderness guide for the last 35 years. And in August of 2018, I had the privilege of becoming really well acquainted with a student that was in my walkabout group. You know, you hike all day, you get into your camp, you set up camp, you got to get water, you got to make your dinner, you got to do the dishes, collect firewood, you're exhausted. But later on that night, you sit around the fire and you get to tell your story. And I had the privilege of hearing Lenny Potts' story in August of 2018. She's become a dear friend of mine. Rather than me tell her story of her journey through the foster care system, I thought she should tell you her story herself. Please welcome Lenny Potts.
Hello. My name is Lenny. So there's this story that was told back when I was in the first grade. It was about a little railroad engine. Now, you may all be looking around at each other, having heard this story before. If so, then you'll recall that that little engine struggled carrying a heavy load up a mountain after many other engines made excuses and refused by saying that, I can't do this is too much a pull for me. Regardless, the little engine puffed and chugged and puffed until it reached the top, all the while saying, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. I was always an unusual girl. My mother told me so. From the moment that I was born, I had nothing but my broken and addicted just turned 16-year-old mother. I grew up homeless and slept on the edges of buildings, street corners, park benches, and an occasional overcrowded shelter in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. We collected scraps of trash wherever we could find some for food. There were no showers, same old dirty clothes. Our only means of income came through begging, and even then, the majority of it was used to feed addictions. Both my biological mom and dad abused drugs, alcohol, themselves, and then me. My father made his life an art of drinking all day and yelling all night and throwing himself to gang violence. He never leaves my memory now, but yet he did leave then. My mother, she was a prostitute, constantly escaping to a world that didn't include me. When I was 4 years old, my mother found a small trailer home. It was trashed completely and left alone mostly. It was home, without the food, toys, or consistent running water. I received my first tattoo in that trailer. It would prove to be a constant reminder ingrained in my flesh of where I came from. A brief amount of time passed, and then a night came that would challenge every bit of my existence. After many blurry moments of red and blue lights, I was in the back of a white van with my mother whispering her last words to me, "Shh, go to sleep." I woke up without a mother and to the next chapter in my life. I was in a total of 14 foster homes. I was thrown from foster home to foster home with no one wanting to adopt me. It was terrifying to feel like I belonged to no one, and yet I belonged to everybody. I ended up getting lost in the system, and for the last 12 years, I ended up in Northern California in a house with blank walls that consisted of daily physical and emotional abuse from a woman I will leave unnamed. During my senior year of high school, a little under 3 months before graduating, I ran away. It was a Friday morning. I had a backpack with a couple of dollars and my school books. I hid behind a large dumpster and spent that weekend afraid, with all sorts of thoughts running through my head. I was afraid I had completely shattered my dream of going to college. Monday came along and I went back to school. I had the same clothes on, I was hungry, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear again. Fast forwarding before my senior year ended, I was placed in a temporary home after many talks with CPS. And during this time, I saved up all the money I had in a jar, maybe this big, and I purchased a Greyhound ticket. I jumped on an Amtrak. I took several buses, and then I walked the rest of the way here to APU to just visit the campus. I would work 3 times as hard the remainder of that year to make sure I got here in the fall. College definitely challenged me, but above all, it helped me grow. And I've had so many opportunities here at APU to witness people walk into each other's lives in just the most beautiful of ways. And last year, during my senior year, I served as a resident advisor, and as part of our training, we hike out to the wilderness and backpack for 10 days. Unfortunately, our trip was cut short a little bit due to the fires. But nevertheless, on this trip, I saw a group of strangers come together and literally carry each other's packs up and down those mountains and become a family. I saw how diligent and how caring our guide, Bixby, was. And on this trip, I saw God transform this whole idea of family for me. And out there, amidst the stillness of Yosemite, my walkabout team, APU just became my home, a home filled just with the most remarkable people walking every single pathway of life. A little over 4 years ago, I began a journey towards higher education, but I also began a path towards writing my story. I am currently working towards my master's in education and single subject credential here at APU. And my desire is to teach and to serve students in the best way possible, particularly in high school history. Back in late August, I was asked to speak to a group of students who are foster and are aging out of the system that I once was in. A system that 1,400 youth age out of every single year. A system in which only 3% represent the number of foster youth in all of the United States that graduate with a bachelor's degree. A system that had left each of us completely broken, alone, and unseen. But standing there and speaking to them, they saw that they were not alone. I was there with them, and we were there together. This was all a part of God's plan. That 3% that I made was not just for me, it was completely for them. And in their arms, I was brought full circle to his message of love and family. God loves more in a moment than anyone could in a lifetime. I think as far back as I can remember, I would cry out to God, "Oh God," and each time I would think he wasn't listening to me. And now I see that he answered 100 times in my one cry with, "I am here." Attending a university was a far-off dream in space for me, and there's always a million reasons not to do something, but you gotta take a chance on something sometime. And my journey here began by saving up all the money I had in a piggy bank, and I'm in awe of the plan that God had for me, and he was bringing me home to the family that he wanted for me, and I just had to trust him with my whole heart. So remember the little story of the little engine that could? That little engine with a great big wheel that stood right at the bottom of a great big hill, that I think I can, slowly changed over time to I knew I could. And that helped getting that little engine get over what seemed to be an impossible hill to overcome. Thank you.
Love you. So I loved Lenny the moment I saw her. So did you. Lenny, thank you so much. Lenny graduated, by the way, this past May. Let me leave you the 4 things, then we'll be done. So I want you to understand this, because I know with as many as are here, like I said, 2,000 or 3,000, I know some of you are dealing with some heavy stuff. Let me share with you promises from God. God is not surprised by any unfair action taken against you. God is in control of your life. God has promised in his word that he will never leave you or forsake you. And he has promised to be by your side every step of the way. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for an institution like this that puts you first. Thank you for the story of Lenny. I pray that you continue to guide and lead her life. Thank you for the way you love us and you promise never to leave us. Bless this student body and bless them on this day. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great day.